Where in the Constitution does it say that the Secretary of State can override the First Amendment protections of free speech? Is there a footnote that I missed somewhere?
There's no constitutional right to a student visa. There's a statute that says the Secretary of State gets to determine whether someone is a threat. We deny visas every day all over the world.
Do you think that the
I will continue to revoke the visas of these people that come here to tear this country apart.
You said that, Mr. Secretary. Let me reclaim my time because...
All right, let's talk about what just happened. Pramila Jayapal came in swinging with a familiar approach, strong claims, emotional framing, and that classic gotcha energy, as if she was about to corner someone on camera. But she picked the wrong target. What was supposed to be a takedown quickly turned into the opposite. As the exchange unfolded, Marco Rubio stayed composed and methodical, shifting the momentum completely. What she expected to be a viral moment in her favor instead became a moment where the conversation slipped out of her control. Stick around, because this breakdown gets even more interesting.
The State Department approved the revocation of a student visa for Rümeysa Öztürk, a Turkish citizen who is a graduate student at Tufts University, apparently simply for writing an op-ed. According to an internal State Department memo, you took this action under your discretionary authority to revoke visas, and soon after you revoked her visa, armed and masked plainclothes officers snatched Ms. Öztürk off the street and transported her to a prison in Louisiana. Mr. Secretary, do you really think that Ms. Öztürk's op-ed results in a foreign policy consequence for the United States?
I believe that case involves someone whose visa we never would have granted had we known ahead of time.
I'm not asking you that question. I'm asking you if you think an op-ed, but that's exactly, in fact, what happened. The State Department wrote a memo concluding that you did not have sufficient grounds to revoke Ms. Öztürk's visa. There was no evidence showing that she'd engaged in any activities that were a threat to national security. And in fact, in May, a federal court ordered Ms. Öztürk's release from detention, noting that the sole basis for the government's detention appeared to be the fact that she co-authored this opinion piece in the Tufts newspaper in March of 2024. Where in the Constitution does it say that the Secretary of State can override the First Amendment protections of free speech? Is there a footnote that I missed somewhere?
There's no constitutional right to a student visa.
But is there a constitutional right? Does it say somewhere that Marco Rubio gets to determine which speech is appropriate and revoke student visas based on what you think constitutes free speech?
There's a statute that says the Secretary of State gets to determine whether someone is a threat. We deny visas every day all over the world.
Do you think that the Immigration and Nationality Act trumps the Constitution of the United States, Mr. Secretary?
Well, Congress can always change the law if you want, but I'm telling you,
Mr. Secretary,
while I have the authority, I will continue to revoke the visas of these people that come here to tear
You
this
said that,
country
Mr. Secretary. Let me reclaim my time because you are talking about revoking student visas based on what somebody says. And that means that you are trumping the legal Supreme Court, the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution of the United States.
No one has a right to a student visa.
Mr. Rubio, why did the administration need to use masked, armed, unidentified agents to whisk somebody off the street and deny her counsel for almost 24 hours after her arrest?
Well, you'll have to ask the agencies that did that work. I'm not responsible. That I'm responsible for revoking the visas of these people that come to tear this country apart.
Secretary Rubio, I'm talking about this particular case where you revoked the student visa of a Turkish citizen who was a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that you didn't like. And suddenly you allowed for masked men to whisk her off the street. And you have multiple jobs, apparently. You're the national security advisor as well. So don't tell me it's not your job. Who snatches her off the street?
We don't do the snatching, but I can tell you we do the visa revocations.
Let me ask you about the national security consequences of people, masked men on the streets, snatching people off the streets. If these are legitimate law enforcement agents carrying out proper arrests, why are they hiding their identities?
Because then radical crazies will try to hurt them.
So you think that U.S. agents who have almost always gone without face coverings, even when they're arresting some of the country's most dangerous criminals, suddenly have so much to fear from a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that they need to be masked?
Again,
is that
that law student was a guest in the United States on a student visa. No one's entitled to a student visa.
So you revoked her student visa based on an op-ed which trumps the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution.
Someone's coming up here to stir up problems on our campus. We're going to revoke their visa.
She didn't do any of that. She wrote an op-ed.
Well,
she
that's
wrote
what
an
you
op-ed,
claim.
and I'm talking to you about her particular
That's her
case.
claims and your
You
claims. Those are not the facts.
you reclaiming my time. You revoked her student visa
Yes,
because
proudly.
she wrote an op-ed.
And
Would
we'll
you
do more. We're
revoke?
gonna do more of
I
them.
have another question for you. Would you revoke the visa of someone in the United States who published claims that quote Jews are an untrustworthy and dangerous group? Yes or no?
We will revoke the visa of anyone who's in this country as a guest
Are
who's
you
here to stir up
going to
trouble.
revoke the visa of somebody who made
Send me
that?
the case,
that,
I'll look at it.
that
I'm looking
statement?
to
Well,
get crazy people out of
actually,
our
it's not
country.
just about revoking.
Forward
You
to
actually,
revoking the
Secretary
visas of any
Rubio,
lunatics you
excuse
can
me,
identify.
reclaiming my time. Can you explain to me why the Trump administration granted refugee status to Charles Kleinhaus, the white Afrikaner who tweeted that exact statement that I just said? There's the case.
That's not a visa.
You granted that person
That's
to
a
enter
totally
the United
different process.
States.
That's someone that applied here through a totally different process.
Secretary Rubio,
visas are a privilege.
Secretary
we deny
Rubio,
them all the time, and
you
we'll revoke
revoked
them.
a visa based on an op-ed, and then you allowed for
Gentlelady's time has
masked
expired.
men
That's
to
your
snatch
claim. That's
somebody off
accurate. That's
the
your claim.
street.
Your
That's
time's
your
expired.
claim. That's your claim. That's not accurate.
Recognize.
Let's break down what actually happened here, because the viral clips don't tell the full story. Pramila Jayapal entered the hearing with a very clear strategy: framed the issue through emotion and public outrage. She used phrases like masked agents, people being taken off the streets, and claims that immigration enforcement is being used to suppress free speech. The goal wasn't just to ask questions, it was to shape how the audience feels in real time. Her central argument focused on the idea that immigration enforcement is being used in a way that discourages political expression, especially among students and public voices. However, that framing runs into a legal reality that wasn't fully addressed. That's where Marco Rubio takes control. Instead of reacting emotionally or getting pulled into the narrative, he keeps redirecting the discussion back to immigration law and legal authority. His core point is simple but important: a student visa is not a constitutional right. It is a discretionary immigration status, governed by eligibility rules and policy, not protected in the same way as citizenship rights. So when the discussion shifts toward free speech concerns, Marco Rubio separates the issues clearly. Speech may be protected, but immigration status is still subject to enforcement under federal law. From there, a clear pattern emerges. Pramila Jayapal continues to present individual cases and emotional arguments, while Marco Rubio consistently brings the conversation back to legal structure and authority. When visa revocation comes up, his position remains steady: the State Department has the authority to revoke visas when conditions are no longer met. That is standard practice within immigration law. She then attempts to compare different immigration categories, such as student visas and refugee status. But those comparisons don't align legally, because each category operates under different rules and standards. What you're really watching here is not just a heated exchange, but two completely different approaches. One side builds its argument through emotional framing and public perception. The other relies strictly on statutory authority and legal interpretation. Marco Rubio's advantage in this exchange comes from staying grounded in the law and refusing to engage in broader emotional narratives. On the other hand, Pramila Jayapal's strategy depends on expanding the discussion into moral and emotional territory. But each time the conversation is pulled back to legal definitions, that framing loses strength. At its core, this isn't just a disagreement about one case. It's a deeper debate about how immigration enforcement should be understood, through emotion and narrative, or through law and authority. Now the real question is for you: do you think Marco Rubio was right to stay strictly focused on the law? Or do you think Pramila Jayapal raised valid concerns about how enforcement is being carried out? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't sit on the fence.